The importance of having a president who understands the power of diplomacy and understands the strength that rests in understanding the significance of diplomacy and strengthening alliances.
Just hours later, the Harris campaign announced this morning it had raised $310 million in July. That's more than double what Trump raised last month. The New York Times reports, quote, the surge in fundraising has allowed Democrats for the first time in months to have a cash-on-hand advantage over Republicans. The Harris campaign said it now has $377 million in its war chest, in contrast to the $327 million the Trump campaign says it has. The biggest development for candidate Trump today is about one of the prosecutions against him. Donald Trump's January 6th federal election subversion case is officially back in the hands of Judge Tanya Chutkan. Barbara McQuaid, who will join us shortly, told the Washington Post, quote, there is some urgency to the case because the public has a right to a speedy trial, just as the defense does. And if Donald Trump is not elected president, this case will go to trial eventually. So the prosecution and the judge have a duty to protect that right by acting with urgency. Now, as for the Trump campaign, the fallout continues from Donald Trump's disastrous racist interview with the National Association of Black Journalists. Axios reports today that while Donald Trump blamed his late start on an audio issue, quote, the bigger problem was his threat not to take the stage when he had agreed to go on. He did not want to be fact-checked, but we could not let him on the stage without fact-checking. That's according to the NABJ president, Ken Lemon. While Donald Trump avoided more attacks today on Vice President Harris's racial identity, he had this to say about a possible debate with her.
Are you going to debate her?
Well, I want to. We're leading in the polls, it seems, by quite a bit still. She's better than he is, but I think ultimately she'll be worse than him.
Joining us now is the Democratic Congresswoman Marilyn Strickland of Washington State. Congresswoman, thank you for being with us. You know, on one hand, we don't want to debate for too long Donald Trump's nonsensical statements at NABJ, but there's some fundamental misunderstanding that either he has or he's deliberately trying to sow about the tens of millions of people in this country who have multiple ethnic or racial identities.
He definitely has. And he talked about Kamala Harris, the vice president, in terms of, is she really black? And as long as I have known of Vice President Harris, even during her time as district attorney, as a senator, as vice president, obviously, she has always proudly talked about being Indian American and African American. So his attempt to try and divide the Democratic Party was not successful, and it looks like it's backfiring on him. On top of that...
Sorry, go ahead. I was going to say, I'm not sure it's going to land with anyone, but go ahead.
Yeah, no, and I was going to say, you know, it's interesting because when he agreed to take the stage at the National Association of Black Journalists, he was not there to try and convince the African-American community or African-American journalists to support him or why they should vote for him. He was there as a con man, as a performer to sow chaos. He was talking over them. He wouldn't answer questions, and he was just trying to divide because Kamala Harris is the most qualified person to be President Biden's successor because of her record, because of her serving with him for 3.5 years during tumultuous times, both here at home and abroad. So he has nothing. So he's now just trying to drag up anything to see if it sticks. And it's not sticking.
I want to read something that you wrote in an op-ed called The Black and Asian Experience. You wrote this for the Northwest Asian Weekly after these comments. You write, mixed-race leaders can bring coalitions together, often among disparate groups. It's how we've had to navigate the world our entire lives. People ask me if I consider myself more black or Korean. Why must I choose? I benefit from the best of both worlds, what we've overcome and what we've contributed to this nation. I come from enslaved people who built this country, fought for it, and were denied basic rights. I come from people who came to America not knowing the language or customs and were treated like outsiders who don't belong here. You clearly painted this as a strength, an advantage, which I think that's how most Americans see this. Tell me a little bit more about this, because even Republicans are outraged at what happened the other day.
So remember, when Vice President Harris was announced as the person that President Biden supports, the attack started immediately. First, they tried to say she was a failed border czar, when in fact, people coming over the southern border has decreased by 50% through President Biden's executive order. And there is a bill sitting in the Senate, a bipartisan bill to address the border that Donald Trump demanded not come to the floor. So if anyone's going to have responsibility, it lands solely with Donald Trump. When I think about the statement that I wrote, though, I think about the fact that for us in the Democratic Party, we view our identity as an asset. And think about the enthusiasm, the volunteers signing up, the first-time donor to this campaign. People are energized and excited and ready to get to work for Vice President Harris. And that means that things aren't looking so good for Mr. Trump. So instead of trying to come up with something policy related, because he has nothing, he's trying to attack her identity. So to his base, her identity is something that is a liability. To us, it is an asset. And it's obvious that the Black community is energized, the Asian American community is energized, and a lot of people who are kind of just sleepwalking through the election are now ready to get to work to make her the next president of the United States.
Let's talk about doing that instead of talking about policy. At least you'd think in the House maybe there's some policy, but there's just been a tweet from CBS News congressional reporter Scott MacFarlane about some upcoming bills on the Republican side of the House, all having to do with Trump. Let me just list some of these to you. Ordering the U.S. Mint to print $500 bills with Donald Trump's portrait on them, renaming Dulles Airport for Donald Trump, renaming U.S. coastal waters for Donald Trump, expunging his impeachments, formally declaring he didn't engage in insurrection, and declaring Donald Trump was politically persecuted. I don't know if that doubles for policy in your world, but doesn't in mine.
No, it doesn't. So instead of coming up with these ridiculous ways to honor Donald Trump, what they need to do is focus on getting a farm bill passed. Yep. What we need to do is focus on these appropriations bills. What we need to do is work on avoiding a government shutdown in September. What they need to do is come up with a suggestion of how we're going to try and reduce costs for families. They have nothing at all to run on. And this is why they're engaging in these games and this ridiculous behavior, because Democrats are there to govern and to do the people's work. They are doing the opposite. And this is really in line with Trump's Project 2025, right? Mm-hmm. It's an attempt to dismantle government, to have loyalty to Trump, and to give this man far too much power. And this is why we have to win in November.
It's actually a central tenet of Project 2025, the idea of getting experts out of government and bringing loyalists in. This very much seems like sort of countries you read about, you know, where there's an overthrow and then the streets are renamed and the schools are renamed. And this is not, right. This is exactly what Project 2025 has in mind.
Exactly. So this is just, you know, for all of Trump's denial about Project 2025, yeah, or for extreme elements of the GOP saying that's not us, we have nothing to do with it, they are using the playbook to the T. And so this demonstrates what can happen if Trump is elected. Again, we have momentum, but as Democrats, we can never take anything for granted. This is going to be a tough race, and this is why we have to show up. 80 million people did not vote in the 2020 election. So we need to show up.
An important point. About as many people as voted for Joe Biden who could have voted didn't vote. That's where the opportunity lies, and that's where our responsibility as American citizens lie, to try and make sure those people come out and vote. Congresswoman, thank you for being with us tonight. Democratic Congresswoman Marilyn Strickland. All right, joining us now is Barbara McQuaid, former United States attorney, law professor at the University of Michigan Law School, and the co-host of the podcast Sisters-in-Law. She's also an MSNBC legal analyst. Barbara, great to see you. Thank you for being with us. And this is one of those nights when it just needs your help understanding Donald Trump, the case is now back with Tanya Chutkan, and she's got a lot of decisions to make and things to do without very specific guidance from the Supreme Court about what to do about the existing case against Donald Trump.
Yeah, that's right. You know, what she knows is that there is this edict from the Supreme Court that certain conduct by a former president is immune from prosecution. Unofficial acts are not. And it's her job now to decide which of the allegations in the indictment fall within which bucket. I imagine if I were in Tanya Chutkan's shoes, what I would do is arrange for a status conference to bring the parties in and talk through how to proceed. But I also think that in fairly short order, we're going to have a hearing here in one way or another for her to decide which of those acts alleged in the indictment are immune and which are not, so that the case can proceed to trial.
Help me with this, because as a prosecutor, your job would be to help the judge come to a conclusion based on the law. There are lots of people in this country who think what the Supreme did was perverse, that it's not actually in keeping with the law or the Constitution. So how does Tanya Chutkan walk that line when she probably doesn't believe some of what the Supreme Court said to be true, but she's got to stick to those rules? She's got to stick within those lines.
Oh, absolutely. You know, there are many times when judges have to follow the law that they don't like. I know I've spoken to many judges, for example, who are opposed to mandatory minimum sentences and yet find themselves required to impose them. So I think she will do her best to follow the ruling. It may even be that Jack Smith decides to pare down the indictment from some of the allegations that are clearly in the protected category that the Supreme Court has announced. For example, the allegations relating to Donald Trump's demand to the Justice Department to falsely claim that they had found fraud in the election. Those are going to be, I think, quite clearly protected by the immunity. But there are some other areas that are a little bit grayer. The areas where Donald Trump is talking to Mike Pence in his capacity as president of the Senate and urging him not to certify the outcome of the election. I think that's a little bit of a gray area. And then there are other areas that I think are very likely not protected and will be considered private conduct, arranging false slates of electors and pressuring state officials to put together alternate slates of electors. I think those are all going to be fair game. But the other really tricky part about the court's decision, Allie, is the part that even Amy Coney Barrett really backed away from. And that was the part where the court said you can't even use as evidence official acts to prove crimes committed in unofficial acts. And so that's where that conversation with Mike Pence becomes such a gray area. But that's what the court's going to have to work through. Judge Chutkan will either hear testimony from these witnesses or will rely on the parties to produce what's called a written proffer to say, here's the allegation, we think it's not protected, and here's how we're going to prove it through the following evidence, which we also think is not protected and should proceed. She'll make a decision, and no doubt we will see some party appeal her decision. Sure. And so I don't think this case will be coming to trial anytime soon.
But your valid point is it needs to not stop. It needs to carry on, because that's how the justice system has to work. Barbara, great to see you. Thank you for your very, very clear explanations. Barbara McQuade. All right, coming up, the Democratic plan to push back on the Supreme Court's extremism. That's next.
It ain't my dad's razor, Dad.
Hey, watch it.
It's from Gillette Labs. This green bar releases trapped hairs from my face.
Game changer.
While the Flex, this contours to it. So the 5 blades can get virtually every hair in one stroke. For the ultimate Gillette shaving experience.
The best a man can get
is Gillette Labs.
Why do couples choose a Sleep Number smart bed?
Can it keep me warm when I'm cold?
Wait, no, I'm always hot.
Sleep Number does that.
Can I make my side softer?
Can I make my side firmer?
Sleep Number does that.
Can I help us sleep better and better?
Please.
Sleep Number does that. 94% of smart sleepers report better sleep. Save 40% on the Sleep Number limited edition smart bed, plus free home delivery on select smart beds when you add an adjustable base. Shop now.
After my hair started thinning, my dermatologist recommended Nutrafol. The formulas are clinically tested.
My hair is much stronger and longer.
I feel like I'm a completely different person.
Get growing at Nutrafol.com.
The dentist's office just lost my crown, but that's not what concerns me. It's that they have my social security number.
The DMV that hasn't updated their computer.